1 in 5 children won't make it through childhood without facing a serious mental illness. That's a pretty huge number, and it makes you realize just how important it is to get a grip on children's mental health.
Yeah, it really does show a worrying trend. Makes it clear we need to understand what shapes a child's emotional well-being.
And that's where our guest today, Erika Komisar, comes in. I mean, she's not just a parenting expert, she's a psychoanalyst too. Over 30 years of experience, and she's got some really interesting and sometimes controversial ideas about how to raise mentally healthy kids.
She's all about this holistic approach. Advocates for what she calls the 3 Ps: presence, prioritization, and prevention.
Okay, those 3 Ps. Can you break those down for me? Like, what does she actually mean by presence?
So she really stresses that just being there physically and emotionally, especially in those early years when their brains are developing so fast, from 0 to 3, is like the foundation. She's saying those early years, the child's environment and who's taking care of them, it has a massive impact on how they develop emotionally.
So it's not just about like spending time with your kids, but actually being engaged, paying attention to what they need.
Exactly. Creating that secure and stable environment where kids feel seen and heard, like really understood. That's what she believes is crucial for them to learn how to regulate their emotions and just be, well, okay.
Gotcha. So that's presence. What about prioritization? What does that look like?
Well, this is where things get, maybe a little controversial. She says society just doesn't prioritize kids the way we should. She's a huge advocate for extended paid parental leave, points to all this research that shows how good it is for kids' development and for the mom's mental health too. She even suggests some pretty radical solutions, like borrowing from Social Security to make longer leave possible, emphasizes the long-term benefits for everyone, really.
Definitely a bold stance. It makes you think about, what we're willing to sacrifice as a society and how it affects families.
For sure. And it ties right into her 3rd P of prevention. For her, prevention's not just about reacting to problems, it's about stopping them before they even start. And that includes taking a stand against things she sees as harmful to a child's well-being. Like early daycare, for example.
Yeah, I can see how that one might cause a stir. Does she say why she feels that way?
Oh, yeah. She cites studies showing higher levels of cortisol, that's the stress hormone, in babies who go to daycare. She argues that it can disrupt the bond between mother and child, that crucial bond in those early years, which she believes is absolutely vital for kids to develop emotionally and learn to handle stress.
So if I'm following her, it sounds like she's saying moms should be the primary caregivers, at least in those early years.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's a key point for her. And that leads her to this whole discussion about the roles of mothers and fathers, bringing in evolutionary psychology and hormones.
Wait, hold on. How does she connect those to parenting?
So she's saying mothers, because of the hormone oxytocin, they're biologically wired to be more nurturing, more sensitive to their baby's needs. That consistent emotional support, she says, is what helps a child learn to regulate their own emotions.
So like moms are the emotional guides, helping kids figure out their feelings.
That's a good way to put it. And she sees dads as having this super important role too, but a different one. She points to vasopressin in fathers, which she links to, like a more playful and physical style of interaction. Encourages exploration, taking risks, and ultimately becoming more independent from the mother.
It sounds like she's suggesting that there are these like biologically driven differences that naturally lead to specific roles in parenting.
You're right on the money. That's exactly her argument. And it leads her to criticize what she sees as a blurring of those roles in modern parenting. She worries that we're unintentionally getting in the way of kids developing healthy attachment and emotional regulation.
That's a big statement. So what are some of the specific things she's concerned about? Daycare is one, right? But are there others?
Oh yeah, daycare is a big one. She also goes after the idea that quality time can make up for not enough time overall. Says you just can't replace actually being there, even if you cram a few hours with concentrated playtime.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents trying to balance work and family will relate to that, even if it makes them a little uncomfortable. We're all just doing our best, right?
Totally. It's tough out there. But her point is, we have to be honest about what we might be giving up and prioritize those early relationships as much as we possibly can.
Okay, so we've talked about presence and prioritization, and we've seen some of Komisar's more controversial ideas. Where does prevention come into all of this?
Well, for her, prevention isn't just about avoiding certain things. It's also about understanding how societal pressures affect kids' mental health.
Like what? Give me an example.
Take ADHD, for instance. Komisar sees it not just as a disorder, but as a response to stress.
Hold on. Is she saying ADHD isn't real?
Not exactly. Her point is that we often try to manage the symptoms without looking at what's causing that stress in the first place.
Interesting. So what kind of stressors is she talking about?
She points to a lot of things, including some we've already talked about, like daycare and not enough parental presence. But she also mentions things like the pressure to succeed in school and the constant stimulation from technology.
So it's about understanding a child's whole world, not just labeling them and giving them medication.
Precisely. She wants us to see the bigger picture and consider how stress plays a role in a child's development.
Wow, there's a lot to think about here. But I'm starting to see how these three presents, prioritization and prevention, all fit together to help us understand children's mental health.
Yeah, you're getting it. And what's really interesting is that Komisar is not just about avoiding problems. She's also about helping kids build resilience and those strong, secure attachments that help them deal with the challenges life throws their way. You know, something Erika Komisar talks about a lot is this thing called attachment theory. She basically says that how strong those early bonds are, the ones we form with our caregivers, they have this ripple effect that goes on throughout our whole lives, affects our relationships, how we see ourselves, even our mental health.
So she's saying that what happens early on really shapes how we relate to other people and even how we feel about ourselves as we grow up.
Exactly. And it's not just some vague thing either. She talks about specific attachment styles that develop when we're kids and how they can actually play out when we're adults.
Right, attachment styles. I remember hearing about that, but can you refresh my memory? What are they again?
Sure. Okay, so there are 4 main types: secure, avoidant, ambivalent, and disorganized. Secure attachment, that's like the gold standard, right? A kid with secure attachment, they feel safe and secure when their caregiver's around. They trust that their needs are going to be met. That lets them go out and explore the world with confidence, knowing they've got a safe place to come back to.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about when that early attachment isn't so secure? What happens then?
Well, that's where the other styles come in. Like, take avoidant attachment. That can happen when a caregiver is not really emotionally available, or maybe they just don't respond to a child's needs consistently. Kids with this style, they kind of learn to keep their feelings bottled up and become more independent, but it can also mean they're more emotionally distant in their relationships.
Like they've learned to not depend on others for emotional support.
Right. Then there's ambivalent attachment. This one can pop up when a caregiver's availability is all over the place. Sometimes they're attentive, sometimes they withdraw. Kids with this style tend to get anxious and clingy. They're always looking for reassurance, but they never really feel secure.
It sounds exhausting, both for the child and the caregiver. And then there's disorganized attachment, which I know is linked to trauma.
Yeah, disorganized attachment is definitely the most worrisome. It usually shows up in kids who've gone through some serious stuff like trauma, abuse, or neglect. Their caregivers are scary and comforting at the same time, so it creates this feeling of confusion and instability. Kids with this attachment style, they often struggle to manage their emotions, have trouble forming healthy relationships, and are more likely to have mental health problems later in life.
It's heartbreaking to think about the long-term impact of those early experiences. But does Komisar believe that if you didn't have a secure attachment as a kid, you're just stuck with those patterns forever?
Not at all. I mean, she recognizes how powerful early experiences are, but she also talks about how amazing the brain is. It can grow and change. Even if those early years weren't ideal, she says it's possible to heal those attachment wounds and develop healthier ways of relating to people.
That's good to hear. But how do you actually do that? Where do you even start?
Well, Komisar says it starts with looking inward, understanding your own childhood experiences and how they might be shaping your relationships now, even how you parent. She encourages people to think about their own attachment style and how those early patterns might be playing out in their lives.
So it's about becoming aware of those unconscious things we might be carrying around with us.
Exactly. And once you're aware of them, you can start making different choices. She also talks about how important it is to communicate openly with your partner and maybe even seek professional help from a therapist to work through those deeply ingrained patterns and learn healthier ways of relating to people.
It all circles back to her focus on prevention. It's not just about avoiding bad experiences. It's also about giving people the tools to understand and deal with those experiences when they do happen.
You got it. It's all about fostering resilience, both in ourselves and in our kids.
Speaking of the challenges of modern parenting, I know Erika Komisar has some strong opinions about how technology affects kids. Does she see that as a potential threat to healthy attachment and development?
Absolutely. She's really worried about kids being overexposed to screens and social media, especially young children. She thinks it can mess with the development of important social skills, emotional regulation, even how they learn to talk.
I've heard other experts say similar things about how addictive technology can be. What worries Komisar specifically?
She talks about that dopamine rush you get from using technology. It's really stimulating, especially for brains that are still developing. Remember, the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that controls impulses and helps us make rational decisions, it doesn't fully mature until we're like 25.
So kids are being exposed to something their brains aren't really ready for yet.
Pretty much. And it can lead to this cycle of instant gratification and craving that's hard to break. Aside from the whole addiction thing, Komisar is also concerned about how social media affects self-esteem and body image, especially for teenagers.
Yeah, with all the comparing and the carefully crafted perfect lives people present on social media, it's easy to see how that could make kids feel insecure and anxious.
Exactly. And it's not just about the content itself, it's how technology disrupts our natural rhythms and interactions. She says instead of spending time face-to-face, actually interacting and building relationships, we're becoming more and more isolated and disconnected, glued to our screens.
With all these concerns, what does Komisar suggest parents do? Are we destined to raise a generation of tech-addicted kids who can't socialize?
Not necessarily. She believes parents have a huge role to play in minimizing the bad effects of technology. She encourages parents to set clear limits on technology use, especially for younger kids. This could mean limiting screen time, having tech-free zones in the house, and making sure kids are spending time doing things in the real world.
So it's about finding a balance, not letting technology take over our lives.
Exactly. And it's not just about setting rules for our kids. We have to model those healthy habits ourselves. If we're always on our phones, our kids are going to think that's normal and okay.
It's like that saying, do as I do, not as I say.
Precisely. We have to be aware of our own tech habits and make a real effort to disconnect and be present with our kids, like maybe having certain times that are tech-free, like during meals or family outings, and making sure we're truly engaged with our kids when we're spending time with them.
I see how that would send a really strong message to kids about how important connection and being present is. It's also a good reminder for us grown-ups to unplug and be more aware of our own tech use.
You got it. Komisar's point is that creating a healthy environment for our kids starts with us. We need to be aware of our own patterns, make conscious choices, and prioritize connection and well-being in our own lives.
I think this is a good spot to take a breath and think about everything we've discussed so far. Erika Komisar has given us some really challenging but really insightful ideas about child development, attachment, and what it means to be a parent in this digital age. We've gotten over a lot in our deep dive into Erika Komisar's work. It's been really eye-opening, I have to say. Yeah, makes you think, She's really pushing us to re-examine some of our ideas about parenting and how kids develop.
Yeah, she definitely makes a strong case for putting kids' emotional well-being first and understanding just how crucial those early years are.
One thing that keeps coming back to me is this idea that we can't just hand off the emotional development of our kids. We can't expect daycare technology or even other caregivers to do the hard work of building that secure attachment and emotional foundation.
You're so right. Komisar's argument is that those early bonds with the main caregivers, they're irreplaceable. And they need us to be actively present, both physically and emotionally. She believes that a child's sense of security and how they learn to deal with their emotions comes from those early interactions.
And I think a lot of parents feel guilty about this, especially if they're juggling work and family. It always feels like you're dropping the ball somewhere.
She gets that guilt, but she doesn't think we should just ignore it. She sees it as a sign that we're tuned into our kids' needs, even if we can't always meet them perfectly.
So instead of pushing that guilt down, she's saying we should use it as a kind of guide.
Yeah, exactly. It can be what motivates us to make better choices and prioritize our kids' needs. Maybe it means talking to our partners about work-life balance or setting stricter limits on our own screen time so we can have more quality time with our kids.
It also makes me think about how important support systems are. Komisar talks about that traditional model of extended family, the village that helps raise a child, but that's just not the reality for a lot of people these days.
That's when it becomes even more important to really make an effort to build our own support networks. Maybe it's connecting with other parents, reaching out to friends and neighbors, or even finding parent groups or resources in the community.
Creating our own village, in a way, even if it doesn't look like the traditional one.
Exactly. It takes work, but having those connections and support systems is so crucial.
We talked earlier about Komisar's view of ADHD, how she sees it as a stress response, not just a disorder. That really changed how I think about dealing with behavioral challenges in kids.
It's a powerful way to look at it, isn't it? It encourages us to look beyond just the behavior and try to understand what might be causing that stress in the first place.
So if we think about ADHD that way, what can parents do to address those potential stressors?
Komisar suggests a bunch of things. It starts with creating a more peaceful and predictable environment at home. This could mean things like cutting down on screen time, having regular routines, and making sure your child gets enough sleep and quiet time. It's all about reducing the overall stimulation and creating a sense of safety and security.
Sounds like it's about giving kids a space where they can relax and learn to manage their emotions better.
That's the idea. And along with those environmental changes, Komisar really emphasizes the importance of quality time and connection. It doesn't have to be hours and hours, but even just a few minutes of focused attention each day can make a huge difference.
Putting our phones away, making eye contact, really listening to what our kids have to say.
Those simple things, connecting with your child, can be incredibly powerful. And if you're still worried about your child's behavior, or if you think they might be struggling with stress, don't hesitate to talk to a professional. A therapist can help you figure out what your child needs and come up with ways to support their emotional well-being.
This whole deep dive has really shown how important it is to be proactive and informed when it comes to our children's mental health. Erika Komisar has given us a lot to think about, from the power of those early attachments to the potential downsides of technology and the need to create a supportive and nurturing environment.
She's reminding us that the choices we make as individuals and as a society have a big impact on the next generation.
It's about recognizing that children's mental health is something that deserves our attention, our resources, and our full commitment.
Absolutely.
This has been such an insightful discussion, and to our listeners, we want to know what you think. What stood out to you most from this deep dive? What are you taking away from it? Maybe you're thinking about making some changes in your own life or how you approach parenting. Share your thoughts, your questions, or your own experiences with us on social media using the hashtag #TheDeepDive. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.